This presentation will offer several 2-minute strategies for cultivating creativity in our students. The strategies presented here are brainstorming, viewpoint, conscious self-deceit, also known as the what-if questions, and forced association. Creative problem solving, which embeds most of these strategies, will be discussed in another presentation. My name is Beth Luttrell, and I am the coordinator for teacher induction in the San Mateo Foster City School District. Even with the best of planning, there are times when our standards-based instruction ends with 2 minutes left until the bell. Those are the perfect moments to teach creativity. Some of you may be questioning the statement about teaching creativity. There's a common misconception that people are born creative and others are not. While it's probably true that some children have an early environment that nurtures curiosity, exploration, and problem solving that lead to a more creative nature, what we do in school can nurture or extinguish that curiosity and creativity. Students who did not have that opportunity can learn it in school. No matter where you are, you can learn to be more creative. Much of the work written about creativity came in the 1960s when the United States was engaged in a race to the moon. Gallagher and Torrance were principal authors of that early work, and most of these ideas have their origins there. In her preface to Optimizing Learning, Dr. Barbara Clark writes, "Ideas are like shooting stars. You never know for sure from whom they came, who has already seen them, or who has contributed to their existence. Not all of the ideas in this presentation came from people that I know, but I believe that this bibliography generally credits the major contributors." The ideas presented here are just starting points. There are many ways to teach creativity. These are just a few. If you have something else that works, please continue to use that. Edison said, "To have a great idea, have many ideas." The first and possibly most important strategy for creativity is brainstorming. The main point here is to have quantity, not necessarily quality. It will take me several minutes to talk about the convention and protocol for brainstorming, but the brainstorm should never take more than 2 to 3 minutes. While it seems like a simple task, this strategy alone is highly successful in building fluency and making connections, both key ingredients of creativity. There are rules for brainstorming. Let's consider this portrait, painted by a famous painter. It follows the rules for portraiture of that time, and by mastering those rules, this artist was later able to break those rules and create a unique style. So let's talk about the rules for brainstorming. Rule number 1, we're going to defer verbal and nonverbal evaluation of ideas. Going back to Edison, I haven't failed, I've just found 10,000 ways that won't work. Brainstorming is a time for risk-taking and wild ideas. Let's imagine that we're asking students to brainstorm things that come in 3. Art Costa suggests that we repeat or write down the idea without any comment in the brainstorming stage. We do have standards, and no violence or put down is recorded, but it's not commented during the brainstorm. If a student makes a mistake, we can correct it later, but not during the brainstorm. If a student has a unique idea, this isn't the time to praise that. Once we put down one idea or praise another, the rest of the brainstorm will be shaded by the student's desire to find something that will also garner that same praise. The next rule is to strive for quantity. Remember that quantity is encouraged when we avoid verbal and nonverbal praise or put down. Generally, the answers that are more obvious come out in the beginning of a brainstorm. Torrance suggests that we never stop on a brainstorm until we come to at least 20 ideas. Those don't always have to be written. The teacher or facilitator of the brainstorm can count on fingers, but the goal is to have 20 ideas in 60 seconds or less. And then become comfortable with pauses and silence during a brainstorm. Wait time leads to more ideas, and the ideas that come after each pause tend to be more unusual than the first ideas in the brainstorm. If the only idea you take from this presentation is to brainstorm, and you do that every day, your students will make connections, become more fluent thinkers, generate more ideas, and be well on their way to creativity. With some significant brainstorms, it's important to go beyond the generation of ideas. The next step, flexibility, calls on students to categorize their ideas. Students and teachers should brainstorm every day. Occasionally, the brainstorm should be recorded and categorized, and after the categories have been generated, it's time to elaborate. There are many ways to elaborate. I could have noticed that I had only one example from nature, so I might elaborate by filling in that category. I might notice that my ideas fit pretty neatly into 6 categories, and so I want to find additional categories that I can explore. Or I might want to elaborate on one category by giving more detail. In this example, I'm using what I remember of my son's 3rd grade elaboration on baseball. He began to draw triangle patterns that showed how each teammate defended 2 other positions depending on the possible play. When he described baseball that day, he was learning, I was learning, and I knew that he understood the concept of 3. The viewpoint model builds empathy. As a small child, my dad read poetry to me every night, and one of my favorites was this. Mud is very nice to feel, all squishy squash between the toes. I'd rather wade in wiggly mud than smell a yellow rose. Nobody else but the rosebush knows how nice mud feels between the toes. The point of this strategy is to imagine how it might feel to be someone or somewhere else. Let's consider the word charge from multiple perspectives. What might this word mean to an electrician, a basketball player, a shopper, a bugler, a judge, a commuter whose cell phone is dead, or a physicist? By understanding this word in multiple contexts, we understand something about each person who uses the word. Describe a tree from the viewpoint of an artist, a poet, a land developer, a nesting bird. Remember that artist varies depending on your point of view, and be sure to include music, visual, and performing arts. Land developers sometimes sees trees as an obstacle to building, but sometimes as a raw material. Nesting birds have different viewpoints as well, depending on whether or not you're the mother bird or the baby. A nest high atop a tree is safe from cats, but formidable to a baby who has not yet learned to fly. In a seminar a few decades ago, Roger Taylor suggested that as parents we tend to edit out the what-if questions and call our children back to reality. But creativity is the act of making the impossible possible. This strategy asks us to consider impossibilities. Every time I went to a workshop and learned a new idea, I would try it out at the dinner table. I remember when I came home with this strategy and I asked, "So what would happen if pigs could fly?" My son's eyes lit up and he said, "We could have everything we wanted." I asked, "What evidence do you have to support that claim?" And he responded, "Every time we ask for anything, you say, 'You can have that when pigs fly.'" A student in my class that year was excited by this possibility and approached the question from the viewpoint of a zoologist and discussed the changes in the muscle and skeleton system by comparing the skeletons of several birds and mammals. Another student approached it as a question of gravity, for in the space station, pigs probably can fly. So what is your answer? That's the beginning of creativity. By using this type of question, you can ask students to intentionally consider the impossible. In The Talking Earth, the protagonist is required to go into the Florida Everglades and bring back a lightning bolt. At first, she ridiculed the leaders of the Seminole tribe for such a preposterous assignment, but learning to see with different eyes, she found a metaphoric, poetic solution to a problem that seemed overwhelming. These what-if questions, when we consciously self-deceive the intellect and trust the intuitive, are springboards for creative productive thinking and creative problem-solving, which will be discussed in another module. The fourth and final strategy in this module is called forced association. Similar to Gordon's strategies in synectics, This strategy calls on students to determine the critical attributes of two unrelated concepts and create the association. The strategy asks, how is item or idea number 1 like item or idea 2? In live seminars, I usually ask, how is salt like friendship? If you would like to explore that idea on your own, please put this video on pause before we go to the next slide. The point here is not to find ways that friends use salt, but rather to find how these two unrelated items or ideas are similar. For example, salt is like friendship because they make life better. They both preserve. Salt preserves food, and friendship preserves the soul. They come in all shapes and sizes. They're one of the components of tears. Or a little is a good thing. Too much can cause a heart attack. It's important to remember that just as in brainstorming, we don't stop when the obvious answers are articulated. As you start with this, you might take two concrete ideas from different parts of your day or syllabus and compare them. How is this math problem like a character from the book or article that we are reading? As students become more facile with a strategy, take one concrete idea and compare it to a concept, an abstract idea. How is the periodic table like justice? In my classroom, we had a brown bag and wrote important ideas related to the curriculum we were studying on cards that were placed in the bag. We would randomly pull out two cards and have an oral discussion in partners or small groups anytime we found ourselves with a couple of spare minutes, like when we were lined up waiting to go into an assembly, or when there was a minute until the bell, when students finished their work and needed an extra challenge, or when we needed to wrap up one subject and move on. This is a good opportunity to use frames so that students are speaking in complete sentences and teachers can monitor their conversations so that we can ask students to share at the end of the idea generation time. In this presentation, we've looked at 4 strategies: brainstorming, viewpoint, conscious self-deceit, the what-if questions, and forced association. All of these strategies could be the teaching point in a lesson and take several minutes, but there are also opportunities to make meaning in those moments between the end of the lesson and the bell to end class. These strategies are not something new to teach, but rather one way to cultivate creativity in your classroom. Handouts with further explanation and examples are available on the induction website page, www.smfcsd.net/BITSA. Look for the on-demand professional development page on the left margin of that site. Thank you for everything you do to educate and inspire students to live, lead, and learn with integrity and joy. I hope that this presentation will help you cultivate curiosity in all students. Thank you.